Is that what you would do for your marriage if if your wife was spending too much money just to cut off the funds, just to like teach her a lesson? But what would you do?
Well, it's not teaching a lesson, but I have children. She has children with me. I think that it's very important that if one of the partners is being irresponsible with money, that it's a duty to, in fact, to cut off funding so that they're not no longer irresponsible with money. And I think that oftentimes, especially if you look at consumer spending, women are responsible for upwards of 70 to 80% of all consumer spending.
So in this debate, Andrew Wilson takes on not one, not two, but three women all at once in a fiery conversation about no-fault divorce. And trust me, Andrew Wilson is not backing down. The entire debate centers around whether emotional abuse should be considered a good enough reason to leave a marriage, what financial control really looks like in a relationship, and who should be calling the shots when things start falling apart. What makes this even more interesting is how Andrew Wilson stays cool under pressure while the other side throws out personal stories, emotional takes, and some pretty sharp jabs. But through it all, Andrew Wilson sticks to his points, talking about commitment, personal responsibility, and the reality that marriage isn't always sunshine and rainbows. So, yeah, get ready because Andrew Wilson really brings the heat in this one. Let's jump into it.
Do you really think that, like, you should just not ever have any reason to leave? Or, like, do you actually believe in the fault divorces, or are you just saying that to be, like, annoying about it? Or do you believe that nobody should ever be divorced? I don't know what your position is on this.
Do you think
I'd like you to
Steven
clarify.
Crowder's wife should have been allowed to divorce him?
Great question.
If you have a show cause for abuse, actual physical abuse, or you have a show cause for infidelity or abandonment,
not emotional abuse?
or abandonment, right? I think that those are all good causes. When you're talking about things like emotional abuse, try to remember what your vows are, through better, through worse. Sometimes in marriage, you're going to have years, not months, not weeks, but years that might be really rough.
Yeah, this is such a real moment from Andrew Wilson. Like, he's literally reminding everyone what marriage is actually about. It's not just about being happy all the time. Sometimes it's hard. And what Andrew Wilson is saying here is that people give up too fast. I think Andrew Wilson is just trying to say, hey, marriage is a promise. You got to mean it. So, I mean, yeah, not everyone wants to hear that, but Andrew Wilson is keeping it real.
They might be hard. Marriage is really hard. People shouldn't enter into marriage. They shouldn't enter into marriage unless they're prepared for all those hard times.
I don't disagree that marriage is hard. It's scary. I understand, like, that aspect of it. But, like, if somebody is abusing you and you have kids, like, even if it's emotionally, why do you think that they wouldn't abuse your children? And on second question, I'll let you finish. I'll let you answer in a second, but let me just finish my question real quick. Would you think that it is okay to leave a marriage if your partner, whether it is, man, wife, whatever, is abusing your kids? Do you think that's fair to leave that marriage? Or more than anything, I would even think, like, maybe it's like your duty that you should, for the good of your children.
If your partner is abusing your children, should you be able to leave them? Is that what you're asking?
I was a two-parter, basically saying, like, if somebody is going to
just do one part at a time.
Okay, that's fair. We'll start with the first part. If somebody is going to abuse you, like, emotionally or physically, why?
Physically, yes.
Do you think that they wouldn't? I'm saying both.
Yeah, but I'm not saying both.
Do you think that they're not going? Well, I need to clarify.
Okay.
Would you not think that they would do that to your children?
If you have a spouse who's physically abusive, I think that they probably
physically
would.
Or emotionally.
Yeah. Well, the problem with emotional abuse is that it's highly subjective, and I don't know exactly what it means. So I know what physical abuse means, and I think that all of us would agree with what physical abuse is. I think all of us.
You think, like, gaslighting would be like
Stop, Nina. Let me answer.
Right.
Okay, I think all of us would agree what physical abuse is. I think all of us would agree what infidelity is. I think all of us would agree what abandonment is. Not sure all of us would agree on what emotional abuse is.
Okay, well, I guess I'll, like, try and clarify then. It's something like somebody who's gaslighting you constantly, or, like, I mean, like, you saw the Steven Crowder stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, do you think that what he was doing to her was not emotionally abusive?
Maybe. So what?
Well, I'm
So
saying
wait, but how does that? What do you
mean?
mean? So what? So what if the kids are witnessing that throughout like a 10-year marriage? And you think that will affect
Well,
the way
that's
the kids
different.
carry on
So
their
now
life?
you're talking
Well, that's
about
what we're asking.
So now you're asking about some elongated pattern of behavior that's like never ending or something like this, rather than an isolated incident. So here's what I'll say, right? As you guys kind of giggle and scoff, which I find amusing. All of you,
you.
every single one of you, have been
You seem
mean,
to love
have
women.
been mean to a man, right? Or have had men be mean to you. Every single one of you have had engagements with men, especially whoever you're dating or something like this, where the
I'm sure we all have.
guy's been a shithead or you've been a shithead to the guy. But that didn't mean that you broke up the relationship over that. A marriage is something that's much or should be much more difficult to break up than just some relationship you have with a boyfriend. And the thing is
I
that
don't
human
necessarily-
hang on, let me
have
finish.
ended
Let me finish and I'll turn it over, I promise. But emotionally, if you're talking about emotional abuse, I think that that's really difficult for us to agree on what that's going to be, because I think a person could maybe even emotionally abuse you for 3 or 4 years and then stop doing it. Marriage is work, or whatever you consider to be emotional abuse, or you them. Marriage is work. Relationships are work. Relationship dynamics are work. Now, let me ask you this. Before you guys ask me another question, who here besides me is married? Raise your hand.
Oh wow, you researched us.
You're married,
Okay,
Angela?
Yeah.
Are
Why
you,
is
are,
it
you,
not
li-
next
are,
to
you, are
yours?
you lying, Angela? Just curious.
No. Why would I lie? What do I gain from lying?
I don't know. I'm
Are
just
you
curious.
accusing her of lying because she's a woman?
I like
is
my green
married.
card, guys.
She's
I
married.
like my green card. Leave me alone. Yes, I am married.
And you're not going through a divorce?
No. Why would no?
Okay.
I would like to stay in America, so no, I'm not going.
I don't know. You
divorce.
just raised your hand really slow. It was weird. Just saying.
Well, I didn't know there was like a follow through question, and I was like, all right, what's going on?
Well, I'm just
here? But
saying,
yeah.
like, before you guys are so quick to say anything about what's emotional abuse or what isn't, maybe you should have
you
a
have
marriage.
to be married to know which one is what.
Angela, I
Well,
think
my
the border
problem
agent.
with what we're talking about is like I understand what you're saying, but if you're married and then maybe you're comparing it to like a modern marriage where people get married within like the first 2 years of meeting, but like if you've been with someone long enough and you're saying that this behavior will slowly go away, if the behavior goes away, whether somebody is just ignoring the situation, it's only going to get worse. But I don't see how a guy can be emotionally abusive and then just slowly not be emotionally abusive anymore. I don't see like how like if you're in a relationship with someone,
What's emotional? So let's start with this then. If it's going to be pedantic, tell me what you think emotional abuse is.
She gave an example of gaslighting. I would say depriving of funds. I would say.
Why is depriving of funds emotional abuse?
So, for instance, I know somebody who her husband would go out on.
I don't care about an anecdote. I care about the argument. Why would depriving
giving you an
somebody?
example.
Anecdotes
I'm
are
giving you an
not an
example.
argument. Give me an argument.
It's not an argument. It's an example. You asked for
I
an example.
didn't ask. I asked specifically for an argument. So what I want to know.
I'm going to answer the way that I was going
What
to
I want,
answer
what
it,
I want
but
to
you
know
didn't.
specifically is an argument for why it is that deprivation of funds is emotional abuse.
Okay, so here's Andrew Wilson doing what he always does, asking people to explain what they mean instead of just throwing around words. Like, he's not being rude. He's literally asking for clarity. Andrew Wilson wants people to define emotional abuse instead of using it as a blanket excuse to end a marriage. That's fair. And honestly, Andrew Wilson brings up a good point. Sometimes people control money because they have to. That doesn't make it abuse every time.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example
Of course. Okay.
of how deprivation of funds is emotional abuse. I know someone whose husband would go on trips, and even though they had a newborn baby and she was in college, he would cut off their credit card when he would go on trips. And he wouldn't tell her how long. And sometimes it would be days, sometimes it would be months. She would not know. And so she would just have to survive on the food in her closet, like food that she had in her pantry. Eventually, she would have to go to her mom and ask for food. It was emotionally abusive.
Okay. Well, I know a couple, and what they do is he deprives her of money because he thinks that she spends. Hang on. No, you hold on. I just went through your whole
Did that
diatribe.
answer your question?
Just
gonna
went
make
through your
it
entire
Did
diatribe.
that
No, it
Did
doesn't.
that
I'm
answer
giving you
your
a counter example of how it doesn't. So I know everybody in the exact same type of situation, the exact same type of way. Just the opposite is true. Refute it. Give me a refutation.
Well,
What do
you
you
have
mean?
So the deprivation of funds and whatever my anecdotal scenario is good. There we go. So now we're at a
Give me an
stalemate.
example. Can you give me? I don't understand. The
I know you
exact
don't understand.
opposite.
So
Yeah, 'cause
he's
you're not
he's
making-
doing a deprivation of funds, and it's actually good because it works for their marriage instead of she doesn't like it, I guess. Whatever the anecdote
I'm
is.
curious. What is your anecdote? I'm actually.
Yeah.
So the
curious. Can you
anecdote would
tell
be
us?
that she spent too much. She spends too much money. Because she spends too much money, he cut off the credit card payment, so he deprives her of funds. That's good and healthy for the couple. I've known couples where this has happened to them. Here's an anecdote for you. There you go.
So
Refute
I give
it.
you an example of
Okay,
abuse.
Okay, well then
terrible
that's
anecdote.
probably not. Yeah, well then that's probably not if it's something that like she has an issue.
Well, no,
and
it's
then they,
actually
like,
emotional
agree
abuse to him,
together.
huh? How dare she make it so that that poor guy has to freeze her credit cards? He'd love to share the money
I
with
would
her.
say you might
He
be
would love
right
to.
about it. That's fine, but that doesn't discount what her argument.
What was her
what she trying to
argument?
use as
Her
an
argument was an
example.
anecdote, not an
Do
argument.
you remember like?
Well, it's an
eighth
example.
It's an
What year
anecdote.
did you take geometry, Andrew?
Those
Like
things are not
basic
mutually
geometry?
exclusive.
What?
I'm wondering what year you took.
What the
basic
fuck does that
geometry.
have to do with the price
If
of
you
tea
struggle
in the
with
Boston
logic
Tea Party?
structures.
Geometry is hang on.
Yeah.
I struggle with logic structures because of geometry.
Well, not because it's not geometry's fault.
Okay, Lauren, let me ask you a question. There's
Mm-hmm.
3 laws of logic. Can you name them for me?
What do you mean 3 laws of logic? So, are you saying, like, for instance, if A, then B?
Yeah, the 3
That's
laws.
kind
3
of-
laws of logic. There's only 3. Can you name even one of them?
Yeah, it's like if A, then B, if
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember. Like you
Yeah.
would have to know this.
Maybe
off
you
the
should
top
have
of-
stayed in geometry, I guess.
Identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. Like,
You should have stayed in geometry,
You're
Lauren.
just. You realize how dumb that you make yourself look, Andrew.
Yeah, oh yeah, I made myself look
Yeah,
dumb, that's for
yeah.
sure.
That I can just easily Google. Like, you're really gonna think like it makes her look stupid that you're just like, hey, name like you're basically doing the same logical argument of like
That
the,
she did.
oh,
So I'm
yeah,
just
you're a
doing the
fan
same
of this
thing back to
band?
her that
Name
she
3
did to me.
songs.
Got it.
Name 3 songs from the band. Like it's like we
Then
could just look it
B.
up.
That's what. Hang on.
If B,
She.
then
So
C,
she asked me.
Then if A,
she-
then C.
So she asked me
No,
when
I'm
did
writing
you
it
when did you
down.
fail when did you fail geometry
perfect
for your
score in
logical argumentation
geometry.
structure?
Okay, so
Yeah, I
okay,
got a
so
perfect
let's-
score in geometry. I went on to get a perfect score on
All right,
the
all right,
ACT
all right, all right,
math.
all
I went
right,
on to
all
get a perfect score
Let's
in
get
the
back on the
GRE
rails
in
here.
math, and then I went on to be a math major.
What does geometry have to do with the logical structure, Lauren?
There's
of an
logical
argument?
structures that you seem to be failing. So, for instance, when I gave the anecdotal example of how
Uh-huh.
I'm going to
deprivation
the
of
bathroom while you
funds
guys are having this.
can be, and this is actually one of the logic structures you were just talking about. So maybe you know them off the top of your head, but you don't know how to apply them, which seems to be an issue for you.
Oh,
If I give
need
an
geometry
example
for
of how
that.
deprivation of funds can be abuse, you
Mhm.
giving an example of how deprivation of funds could not be abuse is
Mhm.
not discrediting the fact that my example was
right.
still
Both
an
are non sequiturs, Lauren. That was
It
my
wasn't
point.
a nonsense.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
going
they're
back
both
to-
non sequiturs.
Going back to
They're
your
not
anecdote
arguments.
to how to cut off the funds. Off of your example for someone who's married, is that what you would do for your marriage if if your wife was spending too much money just to cut off the funds, just to like teach her a lesson? What would you do?
Well, it's not teaching a lesson, but I have children. She has children with me. I think that it's very important that if one of the partners is being irresponsible with money, that it's a duty to, in fact, to cut off funding so that they're no longer irresponsible with money. And I think that oftentimes, especially if you look at consumer spending, women are responsible for upwards of 70 to 80% of all consumer spending. They spend a lot of money. So the thing is
Oh my
that
God, that's so
oftentimes,
not fair
It's a
statistic.
misleading stat because women spend money on
Yeah.
a lot of things like household stuff. and
I
everything.
agree.
This is where Andrew Wilson starts getting into the real world stuff that people don't always want to talk about. Andrew Wilson is not saying women are doing anything wrong. He's just pointing out the facts. If someone is spending too much, especially in a family setting, Andrew Wilson is saying it's okay for the provider to step in and fix the problem. That's not abuse. That's called being responsible. And I respect that Andrew Wilson isn't afraid to say it out loud, even when people react with emotion instead of logic.
Listen,
So-
I agree. What I'm saying to you, though, is that generally speaking, they spend a lot of money. So you're going to often find that when financial disputes come up inside of marriages, it's not usually the man who's overspending. They do. Don't get me wrong. It happens. but oftentimes it's a woman who's overspending. And so it falls under the duty and purview of the man to say, no, you can't overspend. And if he's the breadwinner and he's the provider for the family, why would it be problematic for him to say that this money needs to be used in a way I deem responsible for the family?
So then you encourage
why don't you
him
do
to
the
get
shopping?
jobs?
Right, but I wanted to. So you're saying basically to cut it off, but wouldn't that be a red flag as to why she randomly started to aggressively spend on this money? Because if someone who's married and their personality drastically changes, wouldn't that be a reason to find the root of why instead of just saying I'm going to cut this off and starting the beginning of why a relationship fails because of the lack of communication?
Yeah, so I think you're conflating two different things. So if you're asking me, do you think that we should get to the root of the problem of why the woman is spending so much money? I would say sure. But that really doesn't negate the point that if she is spending too much money and the dude puts a freeze on the money, that he seems to be justified in doing so.
All right, so that was intense, huh? Watching this whole debate play out, I really feel like Andrew Wilson handled it better than most people could. He had 3 people challenging him at once, and he still stayed calm, stuck to his points, and didn't back down. What I really respect about Andrew Wilson is that he didn't let emotions cloud the argument. He asked for clear answers. He stood up for the idea that marriage is serious, and he made people actually think about what they were saying. Even when it got messy, Andrew Wilson kept it logical. Let me know what you guys think. Was Andrew Wilson making sense, or was he being too tough? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit that like if you enjoyed the breakdown.